Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I'm Arif and I welcome you all to today's session. To access the notebook for today's session, you can access course page on my personal website arif.me. You can click the appropriate link under the lecture resource column to view it in NB Viewer and run it online in Binder. The other way to download the notebook is to visit the GitHub account RFPUCIT, and all the notebooks for this course are housed in this public repository Data Science. Well, this is the Jupyter Notebook dashboard running on my machine at port 8888, and here is the notebook for today's session. Lecture number 3.12 of the third module, Python Programming for Data Scientists, for the course titled Tools and Techniques for Data Science. My dear students, this is the fourth session on the Pandas series, and today we are going to talk about how to do input output with the CSV and Excel as well as on JSON file, how to read data of these three file formats into a data frame. You can read the Pandas documentation for details. For reading purpose, you can use the read CSV, read Excel and read JSON method of the Pandas data frame. And for writing purposes, you can use 2 CSV, 2 Excel and 2 JSON method of the Pandas data frame. Well, the learning agenda of this notebook, we will start with the reading data from CSV or TSV file. We will see how we can read these files from some remote system, and we will see how to write data frames inside these files on local disk, and we will repeat this for Excel files as well as for JSON files. Okay, so the Pandas version is 1.3.4. Let's start with the reading of the CSV file. My dear students, a CSV file is a text file that contains comma separated values or maybe tab separated values. Each line of the file is a record, and each record consists of one or more fields separated by a specific character. Let me show you this class marks.csv file using the cat command of my operating system. So this is a file. Remember, the number of fields in each line must be same, and the first line is the header, which contains the titles. To read this file in Python, you can use the read CSV method, and there are a lot of arguments that can be passed to this method, and let me show them to you one by one. The only required is the file name, and that will be, of course, classmarks.csv. Remember, this file resides in the directory in which this notebook is running, and within that directory we have the datasets directory, and that datasets directory contain all those files which I'm going to read using different methods. Okay, so this is the read CSV method. The only argument is a string, that is the path, absolute or relative, of the CSV file. This read CSV method will read the contents of this file into this data frame, and of course we can view the contents of the data frame. Great. So this file contains around 49, rather 50 rows, 50 records, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 columns. Great. My dear students, there is another method of the data frame, that is head. This method is used to select or display first five records of this data frame by default if you do not pass any argument to it. If you pass an argument, let's suppose 3 or 4 or 10 or whatever, it will return that much number of rows from the data frame. And of course, this does not include the uh, this header row which contains the column labels. You can always pass a negative value to this method head, and as this data frame has a total of 50 rows, so if I pass minus 48, so this means return the last two rows. Okay, similar to head we have another method, that is the tail method. This tail method is useful for quickly verifying data after you have done some sorting or appending inside your data frame. And once again, like head, by default this method returns the last 5 rows. The head returns the first 5 rows and this tail method returns the last 5 rows. And of course you can pass a number to this method, and in that case it will return that much number of rows from the bottom, of course. And if this value is negative, of course it will return the remaining number of rows. Since the total number of rows in this data frame is 50, so this minus 47 will return the last 3 rows, and if write down 46, so it will return the 4 rows, last 4 rows. Great. Okay, my dear students, at times the CSV file, instead of having the comma, the default separator, it contains a tab. Let me show you this file. This file separates the field with a tab instead of a comma. So if you try to read this file using the read CSV, it will show you the tabs in between and it will not recognize the format properly. So for that, the read CSV method has an argument, that is delimiter. You can pass the appropriate delimiter to read this file. So since this is a tab separated file, so I have passed this \t character to it, and now it has read the data frame perfectly fine. Great. My dear students, if there is a file which do not have the column labels, I have this file, the same file, but this time it do not have the column labels at the very first row. If you are reading such a file by using the simple read CSV with one argument, it will keep the first row, which is actually the data, as the column. So to avoid this, you can pass the header argument to this read CSV as none. So this way it will not read that first row as column labels, rather it will generate the column labels at its own, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on. My dear students, later on if you want to set the column labels to some appropriate value, you can create a list of the column labels and assign that to the columns attribute of the data frame. And this we have seen in our previous session as well. Great. My dear students, at times you have a CSV file which has some comments in the beginning which are not actually the part of your data. So this read CSV method once again comes for our rescue and provides us an argument, that is skip rows. So you check out the file, count the number of lines which you don't want to include, which are comments actually, and pass that much number to this skip rows argument. And if these comments are at the end of this file, you can use the skip footer argument. So if I want to read this file using the read CSV, over here I am just using simple, and in that way you can see the comments have been read as data. And to avoid this, you can use the skip rows argument, and I am passing it the value of 3 because I know there are 3 lines which are having comments in the very beginning. So it has read it perfectly fine, and you can see the data frame shows you the correct record. Great. Well, at times, my dear students, there is a very large file, very large CSV file having thousands and thousands of records, and you don't want to read it completely, rather you want to read it part by part. So you can use the n rows parameter of this read CSV method. The n rows parameter, once you mention a specific value to it, this read CSV method will read only this much number of rows from this file. Please do note, once I run it, the shape attribute tells you that it has read just 10 rows, 10 records, and all the columns, of course. And similarly, if the file has lots and lots of columns and you just want to read specific number of columns, so you pass use calls argument to this read CSV method. And unlike n rows, which is assigned a numeric value, this use calls is assigned the column labels. So I just want to read roll number, group, and English, these three columns. So now you can see, once I check out the shape, it tells you that it has read all the rows, that is all the 50 rows, and only 3 columns have been read. Great. And of course you can use both the parameters at the same time. Over here I am just trying to read only first 7 rows and only these 3 columns, so it has done that. And of course you can check out the data as well. Whatever I'm saying is right. Great. Okay, my dear students, let me keep sipping a cup of tea as well, because it is quite late at night. Anyway, so let's read a CSV file that resides on a remote system. And as usual, if you get an SSL error, you need to set this attribute to unverified context. I just want to read a CSV file that resides on my GitHub gist having this raw link. So let me click this. So this is my GitHub user content account, and this is the file that I want to read. So I can just pass this URL to this read CSV and it will successfully read it. You can always use this bit.ly. This is a service that normally developers use to create a short link for instead of a long link. You provide this long link to this service and they give you a shorter link for that. And they have provided me this short link for this long one. So if I run it, so it will read that data for you. Great. Right, my dear students, reading a CSV from Google Docs. Let's suppose that I have a file on Google Docs. This is a file, and this file, remember, this is a file which contains a lot of data, and the name of this sheet is sheet 1. Okay, so let me fall back. So this is a URL link. You need to pass this URL over here, but you cannot simply pass this URL over here. You had to a bit parse it a little. Remember, this URL has two important components. One is the sheet ID and the other is the sheet name. I have already checked out the sheet name, that is sheet 1. From this URL, I have copied this portion. After this D, I have copied this portion up till this edit. So this is the sheet ID. This complete is the sheet ID. So after this sheet ID, I have to place this text. And then after this is equal to sign, I have to mention the sheet name. So over here, I need to place the sheet ID, which is there in this variable sheet ID. And over here, I need to place the sheet name, which I want to read. So I've used the format method of the string class, and I have created this URL, and I will pass this URL to read CSV. And of course, it will successfully read the data for me. Great. I hope this is making sense to you all. Okay, so let me move ahead. Well, writing contents of a data frame to a CSV file. My dear students, let's suppose that I have a CSV file, a class marks, and it contains a lot of rows. I have just displayed 7, and I just want to select only those rows which belongs to group B, let's suppose. So this row belongs to group B, this row belongs to group B, these two rows also belongs to group B. So if I want to do this, what I need to do is I need to create a mask first. We will touch upon this topic in detail, inshallah, in the next session. For the time being, just remember that this df class is the name of this data frame. I am passing this condition to this, that group B, this group argument, this group column name equals group B. So if I run it, it will return me a boolean value that will contain a true for that place where this group is group B. Note it down. Group B is at index 0, at index 2, at index 5 and 6. So at 0, 2, 5 and 6 and so on for the rest as well, we have this mask which contains these boolean values. Now I'm going to pass this boolean mask to the lock method. The lock method will only return those rows which have the group as group B. Let me show this to you, and you see this is the data frame which I have been returned by this lock method that contains only those records which have the group as group B. And finally, of course, to write this data frame, this data frame which contains only the data of group B to a file, I can use the toCSV method of the data frame. And I am writing it inside a CSV file in the datasets directory with the name of class marks group B. So let me run this. Great, it has been written. And to verify, let me use the read CSV method and pass it the same file name. Great, so it has been created. Do note one more thing, that over here it has generated one more additional column. These values 0, 2, 5, 6, 7 have been written over here. Anyway, that can always be avoided. You just need to pass an argument to read each CSV. Let's move ahead and talk about the Excel files now. My dear students, this XLSX format is a Microsoft Excel Open XML file format. It also comes under the spreadsheet file format. All the Excel based file formats are created by Microsoft Excel, and this data is organized under cells and columns in a sheet. You all must have used this many a times. If you want to work on this, you need to install certain packages. The first is XLRD, which is used for reading Excel files. Then is XLWT, that is used for writing Excel files. And finally, if you want to work with the XLSX format, you also need to install this package, OpenPyXL. So I've already done that. So the requirements are satisfied, and let me read this file now. So this is the file class marks.xlsx. This is the same file. You can open it in just the Microsoft Excel, and I have just shown the first 5 records using the head. So this file has been successfully read inside a data frame using the read_excel method of the pandas data frame. Okay, so at times, once again, you might have seen that there are certain comments in the beginning of an Excel file. So there are a lot of parameters that all of them I will not be touching upon. However, you can use the skip rows argument. You just open that file in Microsoft Excel, check out the number of rows you want to skip, pass that argument over here and run it, and you will successfully see that the file has been read properly. If I just comment this portion and run it, you will see this file contains certain comments that have been read inside the data frame. So let me uncomment this, and this reads the file inside the data frame perfectly fine. Great. Okay, so let's talk about one more thing. My dear students, in case of an Excel workbook, it might have a lot of worksheets. For example, over here, if you see this Google Docs sheet, workbook has only one sheet. But in case if you have multiple sheets, you can read those sheets separately. Now, this is a XLSX file, big mart sales with multiple sheets that contains some sales data of this company for the year 1985, 1987 as well as 1997. So there are three sheets in this file. Please download this from the GitHub account so that your notebook file runs properly with it. If you just use the read underscore Excel method and pass this file name to it, it will just by default read the first file or first Excel sheet, which is having 1463 rows and 12 columns. Let me show that to you. Let me use head. So this is the file that contains all these values. Okay, great. So it has not read the remaining two Excel sheets. So if you want to read a specific sheet, the read underscore Excel has an argument sheet underscore name. So you pass this argument the sheet name. Like in this case, I have passed this name sheet 1. Over here, the sheet name is 1985, 1987 and 1997. So I pass the sheet names and this read underscore Excel method will read that specific sheet into this specific data frame. So after this, I have three data frames, each data frame having its own data of that specific sheet. So this data frame has 1463 rows, this data frame has 932 rows, and this data frame has 930 rows. So I have successfully read all the sheets of this workbook. Great. Now let's see how we can write it back into a file, write the contents of this data frame into a file. For that, I'm going to use the concat method of the pandas data frame. And the concat method of the pandas data frame, please do see the help of this data frame. And the only required argument is the objects method. So this objs method is passed a list of the data frames that you want to concatenate. So I have all these data frames above over here. I am passing them to pd.concat method, and it will return a data frame that contains all the records of these three data frames. So you see now this df underscore concatenated data frame has 3325 records, which is the sum of the three data frames rows. Let me show this to you. So this contains 3325 records and all the 14 columns, 12 columns rather. Okay, if we want to write this inside a Excel file, we can use the to underscore Excel method. This to underscore Excel method is going to be called upon on the particular data frame whose contents we want to write in a file. And this is the file which I want to create on my disk. And this index is equal to false. This is an argument which we normally give because we do not want to store this column, this index column 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on inside the Excel file. So we pass index is equal to false for this purpose. And let me confirm it. It has once again only 12 columns and 3,325 rows. Great, great job done. Okay, so the T is good. Oh, well, my dear students, the last file format that we want to read inside our data frame is the JSON file formats. My dear students, JSON file format is actually JavaScript object notation. It is a text-based open standard file format that uses human readable text consisting of attribute value pairs and arrays. It is normally used for data exchange on the internet between a web client and a server. And for that you need to install these two packets, SQL Alchemy and scicop g2-binary. These two packages we will be using for once we will be reading data from the databases as well. Okay, let me show you the contents of the JSON file that I want to read. I am using the cat command of the operating system to read this file. You see it has these records. Attribute value pairs, name Kamal, age 12, grade A. And again, name Hashim, age 18, grade B. So we have a lot of records. Fine. And to read a JSON file, once again, the method is read_JSON. And we are passing the only required argument, that is the name of the file. And it will read this file inside a data frame. So you can note that this is the first record, name Kamal, age 12 and grade A. And this is the first record over here. And this is the last record, name Zalad, age 9, grade B. And this is the last record. So simple, piece of cake. At times, my dear students, you might come across JSON files in which these records are on separate lines. Over here in this case, we have just all the records in one line, and over here we have records in different line. Let me show you the contents of a file which has the same records but on separate lines. And if you read it, you need to pass the lines argument true, the lines argument to the read JSON method to read this. Let me comment it and show you what it will do otherwise. It is just raising an error for that. Let me uncomment it and read it. So it is reading it successfully. Great. Okay, finally, writing the contents of a data frame to JSON. Simple. To JSON is the method. And let's suppose I just want to write back this data frame into this file temp.json. So I am using the toJSON method for that. And to verify, let me use the read JSON method, and we have successfully read it. Okay, my dear students, this was just a kickstart that I have given to you all. Please do read these documentation whenever you have a problem reading these file formats. Whenever you have problem, there is an argument to one of these methods that will come for your rescue. Okay, my dear students, that is all for today's session. We will inshallah continue our journey to learn Python programming for data scientists in our next session. I hope today's session was informative for you all. If you have liked it, please subscribe my YouTube channel and share it with your friends. I wish you all the best. Happy learning and Allah Hafiz.